All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of Dismantling DEI. This time I get the opportunity to interview one of the people that I am absolutely a huge fan of, Ms. Heather McDonald. Heather is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. She's actually in my film, Bleeding Blue, which I was happy to have her as part of that particular effort. We dealt with a lot in policing. Heather always seems to tackle the tough issues that we talk about in society today, and I'm glad she's able to spend some time with us. So welcome, Heather.
It's great to see you again, Kevin.
You as well. So I want to jump right into this. There's a Yale professor, and I'm going to look at his name. I want to get this exactly right. So he's former Yale professor. His name is William Derezovich, and I'm not sure if I've said his name correctly. But they said he stirred up quite a storm earlier this month, and this was back a few months ago, with his New Republic essay, Don't Send Your Kids to the Ivy League, a damning critique of the nation's most revered and wealthy educational institutions. And I know that's an area where you have spent a lot of effort, and I want to focus on that as sort of the backdrop, because I think that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, we look at Ivy Leagues as obviously the top tier institutions in the country. You're a graduate of Stanford and Cambridge and others. And I think people are starting to wonder if that's still the case.
Well, they should have been wondering decades ago, Kevin. The Ivies do one thing very well, which is to credentialize students. And frankly, that's why parents send them there. If they cared about whether those schools were educating their children, whether they were filling their heads with beauty, with appreciation of greatness, with sublimity, with an awareness of the fragility of civilization and social order, they wouldn't send their kids to the Ivy Leagues. But frankly, sadly, parents don't really care about that. They want the credential both for bragging rights at cocktail parties and also in the hope that this is a automatic into Goldman Sachs and other, private equity firms. But the universities, and it's not just an Ivy League problem. To be honest, conservatives have sort of a safe harbor idea, which is that the intellectual and political rot in higher education, the incessant message that the United States is uniquely racist, responsible for the world's ills, that is a problem that is confined to the most selective institutions. It is not. It is very pervasive, whether you're in a state school, even the community colleges are starting to get the identity politics sickness and poison. But the Ivies, it's even less excusable. They have the gall to charge $880,000, and you add fees, it's probably $100,000 a year,
right?
For tuition and board, and they're luxury places. I went back to Yale several years ago, and it's frankly decadent. In the Berkeley College, which is one of the residential colleges, in their dining room, they had an extra virgin olive oil tasting bar for undergraduates. It's like you're, in the jet set. And what you should be doing is going to Sterling Library and reading Wordsworth and reading Renaissance pastoral poetry and reading the Founding Fathers, reading about the Constitution. They're not doing that, but they are leading a very elite, effete life at the same time that they're out there, whether they're at Yale, whether they're at Harvard, whether they're
community college.
Right. Celebrating terrorists, celebrating the Hamas terrorists.
Right. Which we'll dive into that just in a second. But let me ask you this. One of the things that I believe it was William Derezovich as well that talked about this is he said, we're sort of, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says, we're sort of in this cocoon. I call it a cocoon of ignorance. It's elitists who no longer have outside thought. Mm-hmm. It's one thought process, and you just flatly, it's untested. And so they've all they birthed this one idea, and it's morphed into DEI and critical race theory and things like this. And anything that comes in to attack it or address it or challenge it in any way stays the same. And his contention was, we've all gotten dumber for it because we're no longer sharpening, steel is no longer sharpening steel. Or is that along the lines of what you're thinking?
Yeah, and I'm going to be very honest here, Kevin. part of this is driven by the feminization of the university. The schools have gone along with this preposterous, ludicrous idea that their students are unsafe.
Right.
And it's mostly the females that are claiming that ideas that they don't like put them at literal physical risk. They play around with the rhetoric a little bit, and you think, are you really saying like you're physically unsafe, or is it just somehow traumatic emotionally? And they play with it. It's ambiguous. And a lot of times they are literally seeming to say that they're physically unsafe if they get somebody who comes in and challenges the orthodoxy that ongoing racial disparities, for example, are the product of discrimination and not the product of, at this point, poor decision-making and a pathological inner-city culture. If you challenge the idea that there is no physical difference, no psychological difference between males and females, that the only possible explanation for the dominance of males in the most mathematically challenging STEM fields like physics, the only possible explanation for that
Is racism or
is
sexism.
not either actual mathematical skill distribution, which got Larry Summers fired he resigned from Yale from suggesting that there may be a difference at the tail ends between male and female, both math incapacity and math capacity, or simple preference. If you challenge these things, you are said to be putting the students at risk, which is, it's so ludicrous and it's so contemptible. These are 18-year-olds that have the best life in all of human history. They have endless food, endless energy, endless freedom, endless prosperity, and they go around playing the victim.
Well, I love your comment and I'm going to paraphrase you, but aren't kids just stupid? I mean,
They're stupid. Students should be seen and not heard. And we got it all the reverse. All the professors say, oh, where's the protest? The students, they're too quiescent. This used to be the complaint of the 90s. Where's the protest? Well, we got the protests, or I see what they are. And guess what? They're female-led. I went to the Columbia pro-Hamas protest the day that the then president had issued an ultimatum saying you got to break up this illegal trespassing encampment. You're colonizing public space. You may not do that. And so students just came out en masse, and they robotically marched around the quad in front of Columbia's Butler Library, which ironically has on its frieze, on its pediment, the names of some of the greatest rhetoricians and philosophers and thinkers, Sophocles and Aristotle and Plato and Cicero. Meanwhile, the students underneath were robotically chanting the same thing for 3 hours on end, and it was the females that were leading the calls for intifada, revolution. One guy had fags for Palestine, which is truly the most astounding thing that these gays, LGBTQ people think that their allies are with Hamas. But anyway, it's a complete, they don't know enough to be lecturing the rest of the world about how to conduct foreign policy or anything else.
It would be like your kids parenting you, right?
Exactly.
And I find it fascinating that we do this. Let's take a poll of the kids to see what their thoughts are when they've come there in order to be sort of give, and I don't want to say given your thought, but to at least crystallize.
Yes, you are right on so many grounds, and that's a very interesting parallel because within the realm of parenting, we also have the idea, among some parents at least, that they should be friends, and there's a rejection of authority, that somehow we should all be egalitarian and you don't want to be hierarchically over your children. That's a mistake. Children need to be inducted into a whole realm of self-control, self-discipline, deferred gratification. They're not your friends. You shouldn't be their friends. And it's the same in the university with allegedly you guys have adult authority and you touch on something, you checked yourself, but that was wrong. Your initial instinct was right, which is that they should be putting ideas into students' heads. As conservatives have watched the holocaust of free speech, the intellectual suppression that's going on, their reaction has been understandable but wrong, which is to say, they claim that the essence of education is debate and free speech and challenging things, and you should feel uncomfortable. That's one aspect of education. What conservatives have left to the side is the fundamental obligation of professors is to fill students' empty noggins with as much knowledge of the past as a mere 4 years will allow. It is a transmission of substantive content knowledge. And that has now been put to the side in favor of critical thinking and debate and discourse. There are many topics for which the idea of debate is completely irrelevant. You don't debate the periodic table.
Right.
You don't debate German verb conjugations. You don't debate
Or principles of engineering, for example.
Exactly. You learn, and again, there should be a humility on students' parts before the vast body of knowledge that it is their privilege to understand and one hopes to absorb.
Yeah. I'm a martial artist, and I would
Those?
I would never go into a dojo as a young martial artist learning
Yeah.
and challenge the black belt.
Exactly.
And I see that almost in the same way. I mean, you would get shut down so fast and brutally.
Right.
It would be an interesting lesson. Let's move on. We talked a little bit about, you touched on October 7th. So Heather, you wrote When Race Trumps Merit, which I love the title. And as a young black academic of sorts, my degrees are in electrical engineering, computer science, and math. I've always looked at the idea of lessening for me was always just a negative. And race has indeed this day trumped merit to the degree that I believe you look at a black doctor and you don't feel like you're getting the same level of care. Or a black accountant, maybe he doesn't catch the nuance of my tax policies that I need, and so on. And I think it's unfair. Let's talk about that with respect to what's happening in colleges and universities as it pertains to DEI. I mean, do you feel like I'm justified in what I just said? If I'm a black person walking around with my career, is somebody looking at me that way? Do you feel that?
Completely legitimate, Kevin. Unfortunately, anybody who knows anything about admissions to undergraduate study programs or graduate schools, law school, medical schools, there are vast gaps in the cutoff scores. You know, if you present to a medical school with MCAT scores, these are the standardized medical college admissions tests that are like the SATs.
Or the LSAT for the
Right.
legal.
If you can get into that medical school as a black person with MCAT scores that would be automatically disqualifying if you were white and Asian, and it doesn't end there. You know, the problem is if you admit students with lower academic skills at the moment of entry, they're going to struggle because the teaching is not going to be aimed at their capacities at that moment. And let's take it out of the very charged area of race and make it about sex. Let's say that MIT decides, oh, well, we need more females in our class. You know, we're being gender insensitive by being predominantly male. And they admit me with a 650 on my math SAT out an 800-point scale. And my peers who've been admitted based on their academic skills, not on the basis of their gonads,
800.
are averaging 800.
Yeah.
So the professors in freshman calculus are going to teach, understandably, to the class average, not to me.
As they should.
As they should. So what's going to happen to me? I'm going to fall more and more behind. Enter the DEI bureaucracy to say the reason that your grades are failing and the reason that you feel out of sorts and you know not really in sync with this institution is you're the victim of a rape culture. You're the victim of systemic misogyny. We need more diversity bureaucrats to make you feel comfortable and to batter these sexist teachers. And what's likely to happen is as I flounder, I'm going to decide not to continue my electrical engineering degree because I can't keep up. And if I stay at MIT at all, maybe I'll do gender studies.
Right.
Well, the same thing happens with blacks. And there was a very powerful empirical study done at Duke University, which looked at the fact that at freshman year, black males entered with the intention of doing a STEM degree at a higher rate than white males. But by senior year, the graduating classes in STEM were overwhelmingly white and Asian. The blacks had tramped slow out because they had been admitted with over a standard deviation of difference. Had they gone instead to University of North Carolina, a state school, where they had the same grades as everybody else, they would have stuck with the STEM degree. No one who is against racial preferences, as I am passionately against it, is saying that the beneficiaries of preferences, especially blacks, shouldn't go to college. They're just saying, stop the cruelty.
Right.
Stop the narcissism, you bureaucrats, of subjecting blacks and blacks alone to this burden of being catapulted into environments for which they're not academically prepared.
Well, let me push back on you for a second. So I have a friend, he's passed away, but he got into Princeton on a physics affirmative action. And he flunked his first couple of tests. And the professor says to him, if you're not going to get out of this class, you're going to flunk physics.
Right.
And so now this was 40 years ago. We said, okay, I got to buckle down. I'm going to have to be better than those white kids. And we did it. And it was almost this universal, it was like the entire black race rode on your shoulders. And so you did it. You became the Rosa Parks or the Joe Louis of the movement. And you did it for that reason. But I say to you today, that student doesn't exist. Right. That student does exactly what you said.
And as you say, too, they are then surrounded by an entire ideology that says to them, think of yourselves as victims.
Yes.
And it's ludicrous because the DEI and the college presidents themselves, Princeton, Christopher Eisgruber, their president, had gone around, typical to all college presidents. Eisgruber is not unique in this, beating his chest saying, mea culpa, Princeton is such systemically racist. And so finally somebody said, oh, really? Well, we'll take you at your word. We're going to bring a civil rights action against you if you're systemically racist. You get this, it's a paint and lie. There is not a single university in the country that is discriminating against blacks. The opposite is the case. We were once a country with white privilege. We were once a country with white supremacy. We were once a country with gratuitous cruelty to blacks. We are not that country today. The reality today is not white privilege. It is black privilege. I will believe in white privilege when I hear about a black student who wants to put his race down as white because he thinks it'll help him get into college. In fact, there's lots of white students that are thinking, can I possibly get away with saying I'm black? Because they know the handicap is against them.
Sure.
But currently you get these colleges that are so wanting blacks that they're using vast double standards, but at the same time sending a message through the bureaucrats, but more pervasively than that even, that we're racist. And so if black students aren't doing well, they're
Systemic racism.
They're not going to say, I just have to work harder. It's systemic racism. And I would just say...
And I think, just not to interrupt you there, but I think that is the real cruelty, that we were a group of people, if you told us we couldn't do something, we said, I'll prove you wrong.
Right.
And that's been sort of beaten out of us, indirectly through these DEI policies.
I'm going to be very honest with you, Kevin. I periodically say, I'm not going to write on race issues any longer because I find it very depressing. I am so sick of people saying lower standards on our behalf rather than we'll meet the damn standards.
Right.
That's what Jews did. They said, you can't come to our country clubs. You can't come to our law firms. You can't come to our banks. We don't want these Semitic outsiders. And they said, okay, we're going to be so good that you have to let us in.
Right.
And that's what happened.
Yeah.
And it's very tragic, the arc of the civil rights movement. You see in the 40s and 50s, these civil rights heroes conforming to bourgeois norms. Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, dressed to the nines, doing everything they could, and they were still kept out of hotels and told, you've got to eat someplace else. It's heartbreaking, but they did. They said, we are going to be American. And now our civil rights heroes are basically criminals who've been shot by cop.
Right.
That's how our civil rights heroes are George Floyd and Michael Brown, both criminals. That's now what our culture celebrates. It's very sad.
Well, to your point, while Ella Fitzgerald and Duke Ellington, too, my idols, glad you brought them up.
What a voice.
White people were playing their music
Yeah.
in their homes.
Right.
I mean, there's not many white people celebrating George Floyd or Michael Brown Jr. I don't think there's any homages in white people's homes for them.
Well, liberal whites there are.
Well, I think even I think they virtue signal in public, but in private they have no need for them. But they might have a Duke Ellington or an Ella Fitzgerald, record. And so even at a time when it was legitimate, when racial issues were happening in this country, these folks were still being. I mean, you might not say it publicly, but you were listening to to the greats, the Nat King Cole.
I mean, whites were going to Harlem and dancing. Just absolutely that incredible infusion. I mean, frankly, American music is the infusion of Jewish Tin Pan Alley and black jazz. And it created an art form that is our contribution to world culture.
Yes.
There's nothing like it. There's nothing like the American songbook. We could be proud. We could stand shoulder to shoulder with Schubert and Beethoven and Brahms with the melodic gifts of the American songbook, and then the syncopation, the propulsion, the energy of jazz and big band. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, well, we share that passion for sure. So let's look at this. You talk a lot about Western civilization, which I find the attack on Western civilization. I think you and I agree on this. You go places and that's Western culture and things like this. What's wrong with Western culture? I mean, it's given us so much. We just talked about the music, that we've gifted the world with. And it allows us to talk, as you said, to some of the greats that we talk about all the time, the Mozarts and others. So what is so bad about it? And why are we teaching this, that, colonialization and all these different things that are taught in colleges and universities are so bad about America, when in fact, I was just back from Japan recently, and there's a lot of American culture that I saw while I was there.
Well, the what and the why. The why, Kevin, is something that I am obsessed with at this point, because we are living in one of the weirdest moments in global history where the Western culture, and uniquely Western culture, is involved in a suicide mission. It is determined to shut itself down, to destroy its legacy, to destroy itself demographically. Only the West is self-flagellating all the time. Every single society in human history has enslaved everybody they can get their hands on. Slavery is a ubiquitous feature of human beings. We are sadistic. We are authoritarian. We exploit power whenever we can get it. And the idea that all human beings are equal is so rare and so recent in human development. It happened only in the West. Up until that point, the other was always subhuman. Slavery in Africa, slavery in China, slavery in Arab countries, slavery any place, slavery in North American continent, cruelty, genocide, all of this is everywhere. Only the West developed the ideas that ended slavery. Britain had to station its navy outside of the west coast of Africa to try and shut down the slave trade that was being eagerly participated in by Dahomey chiefs. It had to occupy Lagos in the 1860s to try and shut the slave trade down. The West is the source of every idea that the left fights in the name of today.
Right.
Whether it's tolerance, equality, rights, these are uniquely Western ideas. Science, let's not even talk about it. Everything, we're surrounded, I become sort of obsessed with materials engineering. Like, we're surrounded with all these amazing materials.
Right.
We take them for granted. Like, they're composites, some of them they're natural, and then they get changed into something else. All of it, this constructed universe, it's like we're a new race. Our existence today bears so little to what human beings went through until like the middle of the 19th century. It's not even funny. The squalor, the filth, the disease, sewage, contamination, stink. That was what all human beings, if you were a king, used to look at that. This is all product of the Western scientific method. So why is the West involved in this suicide mission? I don't know. I could describe it. The why is something I'm searching for at this point.
We're seeing in corporate America, and I think there's an argument here that there's a pendulum swing back. Some people say it's a disguise, and I believe this, by the way, that it's just going to get repackaged or whatever else. So whether it's ESG, critical race theory, DEI, that's still there and it's pervasive. And the university system has fed it. I predicted it years ago in one of my books where I said, you're going to watch this because they got to put these people somewhere. So we're there. We're seeing a little bit of that pendulum swing as well in academia. Some of the colleges, universities have pretended to shut down their diversity departments, but again, I'm seeing repackaging.
Sure.
Where do you see DEI? Because I know one of the things I wanted to discuss was what happened at MIT, where they were hiring a VP of, I guess, equity. And you say to yourself, why? They already had another person in the role that was doing that. So they got another 6-figure person that they're going to pay to do what? To take a college, a university that is undoubtedly considered one of the best technological institutions in the world. What are you going to do? And I know we touched on it earlier in terms of meritocracy. You want the best engineers and scientists at MIT, which is what I think you get. And suddenly we're going to water that down with this DEI concept.
Well, everything in college today, and frankly in most of society, including law enforcement, is driven, sadly, by race and the academic skills gap. If there wasn't an academic skills gap, you wouldn't have this bureaucracy, because it's all about papering over racial preferences, papering over the fact that because of racial preferences, colleges are bringing in Black students who are not competitively qualified. Again, they're competitively qualified for many, many colleges, just not the one they've been catapulted into. And as long as those policies remain in place, you're going to have a whole set of bureaucrats justifying it and telling people, don't believe what your eyes are telling you. You know, Amy Wax gets massacred for saying that she's never seen Blacks in her classes, which are graded anonymously, colorblind. Nobody knows who's writing the exam. They're never at the top of the class. And you're not allowed to say that. You have to pretend that there aren't these ongoing disparities. And so the universities now are dedicated to a lie, not to the truth. What's interesting is what's going to happen in the wake of the Supreme Court decision allegedly striking down racial preferences, SFFA v. Harvard. I think you share my instinct to be pessimistic and skeptical, Kevin, because at the time, all these conservatives saying, it's over, we've routed racial preferences. And I said, wait a minute, Lee Roberts' opinion, he's got a very big loophole you could drive a truck through, which is that it's fine to take race into account if it's in a student essay. Well, they've already been doing that. It's known as holistic admissions, where students write about how oppressed by their race. Exactly. And they say, well, we're just doing this holistically. We wouldn't be so cruel and callous to go only by academic, measurable, objective skills. We're going to be holistic. So that comes into account. And sure enough, in the latest round of the first post-round admissions after the Supreme Court case, there's a whole bunch of schools who have not changed their ratios almost at all. I mean, Harvard went down from 18% Black students to 14% Black students. That's nothing. And even 14% is way, way overrepresented. If they're doing 14%, they are using huge racial preferences, because Blacks are about 15% of the nation's adolescents, but they are not proportionally at the top.
Of course not. The schools at the level that young Blacks are learning at, which are the worst schools in America, let's just be honest.
Yeah.
They're not, we'd be lucky to.
Average SAT is barely over 900 for both out of a 1,600-point scale.
Yeah.
So they're way. So anyway, the schools, but some of the schools, MIT, amazingly, they were the first out of the gate with their freshmen of 2028 class. And they actually did comply. They went down from 15% blacks to 5%.
Yeah, which is what I would, along the lines of what I would expect.
Kind of expected. So if schools actually obeyed that ruling and got rid of racial preferences so that the blacks that were admitted, and there would always be some blacks, and you would stop the poaching of every level of college poaches deeper into the pool to try and get its critical mass of blacks, so that surprisingly, the lower you go down, the bigger the skills gap. If the blacks were competitively qualified, you wouldn't need the DEI bureaucracy because they'd be doing just as well. They'd have just as big a chance of being at the top of the physics class as that Jewish or Asian kid would be. It would all go away. But given that I don't believe they will comply with the law, I think we are going to continue getting this, and we will get the continued lies, and we'll get the continued phony accusations that the problem is Western civilization.
Right.
That's what's oppressing you, not the fact that somewhere along the line, the black culture went astray, and it is not passing on the bourgeois values of deferred gratification and self-control that is needed to make it in society today. There's exceptions, obviously.
Well, there's always the outliers, but to your point, that is the problem in the black community. Growing up, I was in a transitional mode, and I was raised by my grandparents because my mother died. And so they had those old black people values. And the idea was, don't complain. Wow. Get it done, right? And that is, I've watched it erode over the last 5+ decades to the point it's we're unrecognizable. There is no standard we're holding ourselves to. But I want to pivot to this, and maybe this will end on this. I'm going to ask you the question, but I want to make a statement beforehand. I see this going, and I alluded to it earlier. If you let in substandard students, they no longer challenge each other the way they do when it's a creme de la creme. When I visited MIT, I got accepted. I saw the most goofy, strange group of people I've ever seen in my life. And I remember being intimidated, like, can I really keep up with it? Because these were nerds at the highest level that had access to funds that I didn't have. And I was watching them build robots and things and, and do things that I was just blown away by. I would have competed because I would have forced myself to be competitive. But I ended up going to SMU, and no offense to that, but it's a good education. But I probably settled in that regard. But it did me well. But my point is, they have the best of the best at MIT. You know that. They also have the best professors. So you put those two together, you're challenging the best minds that are saying, think about it this way, and the best receptors saying, I want to think about it that way. That's as good as it gets. If you no longer take the best students and you're in both hiring, whether you're bringing the kids in and the professors, because I think that's starting to come into play. Of course. I see these heralded institutions, these Ivy Leagues, going back to what I said earlier about Durevich, that where are you going to end up? You've got to, it's going to degrade. There's no other way for it to go unless you continue to get the best.
When I started talking about my book, I'd be asked a question, well, tell us why merit matters. And I thought, are you just setting this up as a sort of a obvious question? Or do I actually need to explain this to you guys? And I fear that the answer is the second, that Americans have gone so fat and lazy, they don't think that excellence matters any longer.
You just fat shamed.
I wish I could do that in public, but I'm not going to go there. I may be sort of reckless in certain aspects, but I'm not going to go there. But it's insane because China is finding its best math talent and throwing everything it's got at them.
Yes.
It's ruthlessly testing, and it finds the kids that have super advanced math skills, and it's putting them in the most demanding gifted and talented programs. China is whooping our ass when it comes to like informatics. They do the PISA tests, the math Olympiads, and they're getting ahead in nanotechnologies and various. Meanwhile, we are saying we're shutting down our gifted and talented programs because there's not enough blacks in them. So Lowell High School in San Francisco used to be a test-based skill, and they went to the lottery because they thought we have too many Asians and not enough blacks. Thomas Jefferson High School in Virginia, shutting that down. Too many Asians, not enough blacks. And we've decided that we would pull back. Like California has a whole rule now where if you're an advanced math student in like 6th grade, you may not take algebra early because in those accelerated classes, there won't be enough blacks. So we're going to hold back the kids that are able to accelerate until they don't get to start learning algebra until maybe 10th grade in the hope that by then blacks and Hispanics will have caught up. They don't. We would rather be mediocre and racially diverse than excellent and compete with China. And China is watching all this and saying, bring it on.
Keep it up.
Let them, exactly. I've said if Trump had really wanted to level the playing field with China, he should have airlifted a few cargo holds of gender theorists onto Beijing University and have them infect them with the poison of identity politics. Because as long as they can remain committed to meritocracy and excellence and achievement and believe that you should free the human mind to be the best it possibly can and not drag it down out of some fear of being called racist or sexist, that's how you advance civilization. And we're passing the torch.
Well, on that note, I believe it was both Andrew Cuomo and Kathy Hochul who had the Chinese spy.
Yeah.
I forget her name. And one of the things that I saw her talking about was diversity. I believe that the infusion of the idea of diversity is this subversive act of foreign governments saying, let's create this chaos in the American system, going back to critical theory.
Yeah.
And let them handle it. Because to your point, China's not worried about how many blacks are in their gifted program. Right?
I don't think it started abroad, but I think that they're very happy to let it go on. I think it really is product of both a specific American guilt, but you see that same guilt in other Western cultures with regards to colonialism. Again, but there is nothing that the West is flagellating itself about, Kevin, that has not been perpetrated far worse in every other civilization. I'm sorry, it's the fact. And if students were taught history, which they're not, they would learn that. Every society has had slavery. Only the West ended it.
Well, and I want to make the point, I agree with you that it didn't start in China. What I'm saying is they recognize the damage that it's doing. And I think part of the subversion that they're doing, it's one thing to bring us down through military and all that. But why do that when we're willing to do it ourselves? So bring your people over and say, hey, look at all this lack of diversity that's going on here. And suddenly we're all complaining again.
Yep.
Well, it's a joy to interview you.
Thank you. It's such a good conversation.
Yeah, and I think we could talk for hours. You tackled the most controversial topics: police. You talk about gender roles. Obviously, we're talking about DEI and diversity and all this type of stuff. And I'm always just floored at the way you go about it, because it's and I don't want to say this the wrong way, because I mean it with all respect. It's unapologetic. And I think that it's a breath of fresh air to have someone, these days, a white woman is actually speaking out on these. And by the way, these are not controversial topics. These are pragmatic discussions that need to occur. And people seem to be afraid to do it. And you with the credentials that you have and the books that you've written, it just amazes me that you do this. You do it day in and day out. I've been a huge fan for a long time, and I'm sure many of the people at Goldwater are going to feel the same.
I don't care. You can call me a racist all you want. I don't care. I'm going to stand up for what I love. But the other thing is I'm not going to infantilize people and not tell them the truth.
Yeah.
I'm not going to infantilize blacks and say we're going to pretend that there's not a problem here, because the only way that we are going to have equality is being honest about what needs to change. And it's paternalistic. I mean, it's a replication of the way whites have treated blacks for most of our history.
I agree.
You've got to treat them as somehow the other in one way or another. So that's not. Truth is what will liberate us.
So let me ask you this, because I got asked this when I wrote my first book. They said to me, Kevin, how did you get so dogmatic and, and just so bold? And I remember my answer was, isn't everybody?
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, you realize they're not.
I know, that's absolutely true. It's very hard to believe that. I mean, what floors me the most is scientists. They know the centuries of hard work and creativity that took to get us to the point where I just had some eye exams, established a baseline for how my retina is. The machine.
Oh my gosh, they're amazing.
It's just unbelievable. You have no idea what's going on. These lights that you're seeing, it's just a thing of such unbelievable beauty and accomplishment. And a scientist knows that, and yet they're still willing to. Every scientific association after the George Floyd race riots, all came out with statements about science is racist, math is racist. They're selling out their own profession. I cannot begin to understand it. They're pathetic people. As much as I respect the intellectual accomplishment of science, if you're not going to defend chemistry, if you're not going to defend
Physics.
Einstein physics, and you're saying it's racist, then you are a pathetic person.